you're carrying around an argument for the truth of the Bible that's right in the Bible. That might surprise you. And this is an argument that can be used for secular sources as well. So even though it's in the document, you can use it as an argument for the truth of the document. How might that work? This is an old argument. It was invented in the late 1700s by a man you may have heard of named William Paley. He called it undesigned coincidences, and he meant coincidences, coming together. Undesigned coincidences are casual, incidental interlockings between two witness statements or two documents that point to the truth of both. Now, how might that work in the Bible? Well, let me give you an example. In Matthew chapter 14, it's leading into telling about the death of John the Baptist. And Matthew says that Herod was hearing about Jesus, and he felt superstitious because he had killed John the Baptist. And so he said, "This is John the Baptist risen from the dead. That's why all these miracles are being done by him." Now, Matthew has a unique phrase in there. It's not found in Mark or any of the other Gospels. He says he said that to his servants. That's only in Matthew. Now, you might say, how can Matthew know what Herod is saying to his servants? I bet he just made that part up, a skeptic might say, just to make it more vivid or more interesting or something. Well, if you turn in your Bible, right in your Bible, over to Luke 8, you find Luke talking about some women who contributed financially to Jesus' ministry and even traveled some with Jesus and his disciples. He's not talking about the death of John the Baptist. It's a completely different context. So he lists some of these women. He lists Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. So a high-placed servant in Herod's household had a wife who was deeply devoted to Jesus' cause, and probably in that society that meant her husband was as well. Now, he comes and tells her about what Herod said to his servants, and this provides a very natural way by which that information makes it back to the Christian community. In this way, Luke and Matthew fit together undesignedly. Neither of them appears to be trying to fit together with the other. They just happen to fit together. Let's look at another one. In the feeding of the 5,000, at the very beginning, Jesus is kind of teasing his disciples a little bit, and he turns to one of his disciples and he says, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" And they say, we don't have enough money to feed all these people. Now, the Gospel of John, and only the Gospel of John, mentions the name of that disciple. It was Philip. Maybe Philip just happened to be the one who was standing next to Jesus. That could be a coincidence. But if you were making that story up, would you make it be Philip? Probably not. You'd probably make it be Peter, somebody a little more important, maybe even Judas, because he had the money bag. But why Philip? We might just wonder, was there any special reason? Well, you go to another passage in John, completely unrelated, and he says, Philip was from Bethsaida. It's a little town along the edge of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, how does that help? Well, you won't learn in John. But you go over to Luke, where he tells about the feeding of the 5,000. He says it took place in a deserted area belonging to the town of Bethsaida. So now we see how it fits together. Very plausibly, Jesus was saying, "Hey, Philip, where around here can we buy bread that these people may eat?" Now, he didn't really mean them to buy the bread, but it was a plausible person for him to ask with a little twinkle in his eye. And then, of course, he created the bread and the fish for the people. That's the kind of incidental interlocking that points to truth. Let's look at one in Acts. Acts can be seen to have come from someone who was a companion of the Apostle Paul, who knew Paul's movements intimately. And this argument is one of the ways you can see that. If you look at Acts 18, 1 through 5, it talks about Paul's ministry model when he was founding the church in Corinth. It says that during the week, he made tents. We even talk about a tent maker as a person who has to work a side job and also does ministry. And then on the Sabbath, when he would, of course, have been forbidden to work as a Jew, he was telling about Jesus in the synagogues. But it says, when Timothy and Silas came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, contending that Jesus was the Christ. Well, Paul was always completely devoted to the word. If you know the Apostle Paul, that's an odd phrase, isn't it? Acts never explains it. But if you go over to 2 Corinthians, Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and he says, I was not a burden to you, because when I was with you and I was in need, the brethren who came from Macedonia supplied my need. Now we have an explanation for what it means by saying when Timothy and Silas came down from Macedonia, he began devoting himself completely to the word. He didn't need to make tents as much. He could preach all the time because probably they brought money. Maybe even from the Philippians, because he mentions in the epistle to the Philippians that they often supplied his financial needs. Now, that's very casual, and that's what's so wonderful about it. It's so casual. It certainly doesn't look like the author of Acts was trying to refer to 2 Corinthians or basing it on it. He may not even know why Paul changed his ministry model after Timothy and Silas arrived, and yet that fits together with the idea that they brought him money. And moreover, 2 Corinthians doesn't mention their names. It just says the brethren who came from Macedonia. Now, there are a lot more of these. There are way more of these in both the Gospels and Acts. And there's a book called Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences in the Gospels and Acts, that you can read to find more of these, available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Now, what do these show? They show that the authors were close to the facts, that the authors were trying to get things right, and that they were succeeding in getting things right. Getting it right on these little details is a mark of truthful witness testimony, and that's what we have in the Gospels and Acts.